The most effective educators are the ones who are open to innovations and breakthroughs in teaching. These educators use the latest research on how the brain processes and stores new information, also known as learning science, to help their students achieve the best results. And what does the learning science tell us? We now know that a single learning experience by itself is not enough for lasting impact. True mastery only happens when we combine multiple types of learning experiences, especially when we put them together in specific sequences. In order to make something stick in the brain long term, learning science tells us that powerful sequences often begin with what is called a peak experience. Peak experiences are like mountaintop moments that give you a different view. Think of an experience that changed the way you saw the world. Maybe you traveled somewhere and gained a new perspective on your life, or visited a museum exhibit that made you aware of new outlooks or ways of understanding the world. Peak experiences expose students to new issues and create the motivation to discover more. These aha moments can be achieved through experiences like field trips, films, and immersive simulations that can powerfully affect their thinking. But even after students have had their worldview disrupted through these peak experiences, what does it take to hardwire these new insights into their behavior? For a new mental model to become embedded in long-term memory, we need repeated practice, much like students do in the four walls of the classroom every day. Learning science research suggests repeated practice works best when tasks are separated in time and gradually increase in complexity, and ideally with at least 8 opportunities to practice a new skill or behavior. Think about the way you learned multiplication. You may have gotten it in a moment of clarity, but it probably didn't become automatic until you practiced again and again over an entire school year, starting with the easiest problems and gradually taking on the more difficult ones. When you repeat something enough times, it becomes a habit, something you can access at any time without thinking. Even after all that, there is one more thing that students need to become fully confident with a new skill or behavior. They need to apply it to the real world in a context that is meaningful to them. Through project-based activities that take them outside the classroom, students can harness their knowledge and skills to act with confidence. The power of real-world application is turning learners into doers. So, if a learning sequence has an initial peak experience, multiple repeated practices, and a real-world application, what would the ideal sequence or string look like? Imagine you want your students to really explore and understand the concepts of identity and inclusion in a way that is meaningful to them. Let's look at an example of a string that could come together to make that happen. This particular string starts with an immersive workshop about identity and purpose, the peak experience. Represented by a triangle, this peak experience uses simulations and games to challenge students to consider new insights about the self and the collective. To make that insight stick, the string uses a number of repeated practice exercises represented by squares. For example, this first one asks students to reflect on their own identity and those of others by creating a personal identity chart. This is followed by a lesson on social categories that promotes understanding about how group identities are formed, an activity about labels and stereotypes that demonstrates the effects of identity-based discrimination, and so on, until the new way of thinking works its way into long-term memory. Then, to help students apply their new knowledge in a real-world application, this string ends with an action civics project, represented by a circle where students research an identity-based issue in the local community, then design and carry out a plan to address it. By the end of this string, students haven't just learned about identity and inclusion, they have had their world disrupted. They have engaged in a series of learning experiences that have embedded new insights and behaviors into automatic habits, and they have applied them to a project outside the classroom, giving them the confidence to use their new skills in the real world. Most schools already use peak experiences, repeated practices, or real-world application in some shape or form. We've all seen students get inspired by a visit to a museum, become proficient readers by practicing over and over again, or fall in love with an idea when they have the chance to take it out into the world. But as research in learning science tells us, each of these activities in isolation is only one piece of the puzzle. It's only when we use all of these elements in the right sequence and in the optimal ratio that we can achieve mastery and produce transformative results. By providing students with the opportunity to develop original perspectives and practice and apply new insights, we are giving them the best chance to succeed in the world. The Composer is an exciting tool that empowers educators to make this happen.